Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Welcome to Spilling the Tea on HR Tech, where we focus on the hottest HR tech news everyone needs to know to be in the know. We break down the news of the week and help you make sense of what it means for our industry and how it can impact your organization. We're recording today on March 25th, 2024, bringing you all the news you can use this week. And I'm your host, Stacey Harris, Chief Research Officer and Managing Partner for Sapient Insights Group. We are a research and advisory firm. And joining me today is my co-host, Cliff Stevenson, Director of Research and Principal Analyst for Sapient Insights Group. Cliff, welcome to the show today. We're just getting into spring. There's a lot going on, but I've been on the road a little bit. You're getting ready to go on the road in April. Both of us are. So it's an upcoming season where we're probably going to have a lot more to share over the next couple of months, right?
That's right. And there's a lot of news in the industry, a lot of new products, some acquisitions, some new AI, of course, right? Got to have that. And it's just a busy time.
Yeah, the word stealth came up in a couple of these conversations today. So this is the secret stealth stuff coming out, guys, right? Every time I see that in press releases, I'm like, really, stealth?
And a press release.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, let's talk about some of that stuff. We'll talk about that stealth, but we'll first mention Workday and Insperity. That was one of the big news items. They announced a partnership, non-stealth, right out there in the open, and that is going to allow them to reach small and mid-sized businesses, which is pretty interesting. Yeah.
This was interesting, and I do think it stealth is probably not the right word, but I don't know that they were making as big an announcement about this as they have in other events. I think Workday is still trying to figure out, I think, its strategy long term for the relationships it has with various partners, and how that's going to work. And I think some of this is kind of like, how do we put this out in a way that makes sense and doesn't actually kind of freak out the whole market, right? Because they have such a big footprint, because a lot of organizations see them as major competition, right? Even in the mid-market and small. Small for us is below 500, we should say. And generally, Workday doesn't really play in that space. I mean, there are companies who buy them who are that small, but it's really only in certain industries, companies that are rapidly growing. This relationship that they sort of announced and shared with their partners with Insperity is going to be something that's going to be rolled out over time. And so I do think that organizations, particularly in the below 500, probably should keep an eye on this. It is definitely a relationship to work with Insperity on. And for those of you who might not know, Insperity is sort of a PEO managed services plus sort of a light version of their own technology inside of it. They've got a lot of different things that they offer. And they have been an organization that's been trying to sort of build their brand and recognition up. And what this really was a deal to acquire Workday as their PEO primary. And so PEO is for the small businesses, basically when someone takes over as sort of the primary hiring organization for an employee that then is kind of outsourced, but not exactly. So it's a co-employment model here in the United States. Not everyone can do it in other organizations. And so Insperity has that co-employment model that they run for organizations. Generally, it's organizations under like 300 employees to maybe like 100 to 200 to 150, that kind of range, right? Mm-hmm. And they've run a PEO for a long, long time. And they basically said, we're now going to, for all of our PEO customers, which is a pretty big number, use Workday as our primary platform for that. And then we're going to eventually go to market kind of as a, Insperity powered by Workday kind of concept under PEO. I think this is going to be a couple of years in the making. They've got a lot of time. They've got to do their own implementations. Then they've got to sort of roll out and figure out marketing and conversations and everything like that. I think this is just what this really harkens back to, is that we're going to see Workday do a lot more partnerships, I think. And this is kind of the start of that, because that is definitely a direction they're heading, because they're realizing, particularly in certain industries and in certain levels of organizations and in certain regions, the partnership they have with the implementer or the firm that maybe is directly reaching out to those customers is really, really powerful. I'm excited about this. I think for the SMB market, it will shake things up a little bit, but I also think that this isn't anything that's going to happen tomorrow, is my sense of it. So.
Oh, that makes sense. And this really has been part of something we've been tracking for years now, which is the need for small businesses to have some of the capabilities that used to be reserved only for larger companies, right? This is sort of a culmination of a trend that's been happening for a while with HR technology of just increased needs for those small businesses.
Yeah. And I think, the one thing that we know is that many of the enterprise HR system platforms at the HRMS payroll side, they don't come with services, right? Like they assume that you're getting your services from some other entity. And I think what this is showing is that where there's a lot of other vendors like an ADP or others, right, who have services just kind of as part of the package that they're offering, right? Insperity did well, right? I think what we're finding here is that services make a big difference at all levels, but it particularly makes a big difference in that SMB market and even in the mid market, right? Like organizations, who's going to sort of calculate the payroll and manage your COBRA and manage your tax deductions. That's a lot of work that an SMB just doesn't have the manpower for, nor oftentimes do they have the resources to hire another agency to do that outside of their payroll system, right?
That's exactly it. And speaking of sort of increasing capabilities for different types of companies, there was a new company mentioned, came out over the press releases, and that was Helios. And they're going to be focused on global payroll, right? So really looking at those organizations that need to have compliance across employees who are living or at least registered in lots of different countries. So, workforce management and payroll, but for those with sort of complex geographical reach through all of where their employees are at. So a lot in the compliance and the ability to have this in a quick and easy way to get everyone paid and to keep track of all of your employees across an area. And that was this is the person, Rick Hamill, that used to be at Atlas, right?
Well, yeah, and he still is. So Rick Hamill is the founder of Atlas, which is a employer of record solution that grew pretty rapidly in the last couple of years. And I believe he still is the founder and owns the primary there, but he's kind of abdicated sort of overall sort of his primary leadership role in there, right? In the sense of he's put a lot of other people in that organization to sort of keep it running. And my sense would be, I've had a few conversations with Rick. We don't know all the details, and we'll probably have more later this year, is that Rick saw a gap in this payroll space, which we know has been happening in the market, right? Pete Takalis, who's a good friend of all of ours, and I have talked a lot about this, that, payroll is in the middle of a real shift right now as part of that conversation. The different type of workforces like contingent workers and employers of record, as well as full-time employees, right? That is playing into the payroll conversation. And so I think, Rick said, look, I think I can do a better job at this and building something that's a payroll system plus some of the HR, elements that go along with it, right? I would say it's something to watch if I were sort of in that global payroll space. I would also say that, I think this is just we're going to see a lot more of these kind of things, right? I think happening, and organizations trying to figure out, how do I address this? Whenever someone tells you can't do something like global payroll, it's not possible, right? Somebody's going to come out of the woodwork and say, well, let me show you, I can make this possible, right? And we've been saying for a while, like global payroll is just not possible to get under one company. And maybe that will be the case, right, for as long as it stands. But there's a lot of people who are trying to crack this one. I'm actually interested in seeing, our data this year is showing definitely that there's a plan to flip more payroll than over the last 2 years or than there was in the previous sort of 5 years. And we're also seeing, and I think this is a little shift from where the market has been at in the past, that people are a little more likely to shift their payroll than their core HRMS these days, which was not the case if you would have looked back maybe 5 or 6 years ago. These year people really hated messing with payroll. Not that they don't, they still hate it. But I do think that people are saying, look, where my employee data sits is harder to extricate now than the payroll processing work, right? And the payroll rules and the payroll engines. It'll be yet to see if that's the case, but I think we've gone through so many consolidations of payroll systems, and people they're now moving them they're like, yes, I want to move it into the cloud. I want to move it into an environment. COVID was a big driver in this because, if my payroll person had to come in and run payroll, that was an issue, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm excited about this. I think we're going to see more of these. I think Rick Hamill is, I think, really engaging. I mean, when he talks about his passion for this industry, you see it in his expression. I think he will, come out with something that will make the market think a little bit. And that's what I'm always looking for, right?
Absolutely. And, speaking of just new entrances into the market, new things going on, this is probably the story that caught my eye the most. It's Cornerstone acquiring Talespin, which is, they refer to as a spatial learning company. I think of it as AR and VR, augmented reality, virtual reality, or extended reality, XR, which is another term that gets bandied about, I suppose.
Yeah, I think Josh Burson put out immersive learning. There's a lot of terms people are using for this, right?
Yeah. But, the idea being that you can learn in an environment where you're able to sort of move around, be immersed in that you can sort of physically occupy the space of what you're trying to learn about. This has huge implications for healthcare and a lot of high tech. I've seen a few use cases of this type of technology for learning on very expensive equipment where you can't afford to have it broken or not being used, as it's being pulled off for training purposes. So to be able to sort of do that and learn on these complex machines or things that could be dangerous in a safe environment, there's a lot of opportunity here. I'm not always the biggest believer in, and I mean, it's in our data as well, that there's just not a lot of adoption of AR and VR tech, but I've always said it's because there aren't that many use cases, but now we are seeing some. And as I mentioned, they really talk about how healthcare has been a big adopter of this type of technology. And I find that fascinating. And I think this is really cool stuff.
Yeah, I don't, Cliff, you're a big one. This is like metaverse, really. Are we going to be teaching metaverse? I get it. It's a bit of a stretch sometimes. I will say this is an area. So Cliff has gotten to know my son is doing some internship work for us. But when my son was sort of coming up through high school and college, university, he was a big proponent of VR and gaming as an education tool. So he used to send me constantly articles that pointed out how the connection between people who have really good gaming skills and really good skills in these virtual environments then go on to become some of the best doctors and the best, engineers and the best roles inside of organizations because they've got really good spatial, they've got really good sort of working in a team and collaborative, all that stuff that can build out in that environment that's gaming, right? And you add sort of the VR component to it, it just heightens that ability. I also have sort of a personal experience. So many people, I think, know that my background started out in learning and development. So I have a bit of a soft spot in the space for me. But one of my very first really big, my own project for learning and development was helping an organization that I used to work for, a big retail organization, open up a brand new warehouse after we had not had many, but a brand new warehouse in Visalia, California. And I had an amazing HR team at that point in time. All my team out there, you all know who you are, Susan and Tina and Claire and everybody who was and them who were working with me at the time. I mean, this was massive. We were sort of pulling this warehouse up from nothing, and we had to teach all these people who were at that point in time on the lines how to do what we call pick lists, right? And now Amazon has this very automated, but 10, 15 years ago when we were doing it, right? Like they would get a headset would say pick box 2, box 3, box 4, box 5, right? And the picker had to go down the line, pick it and put in things, what they were going to package up and ship out, right? And so to do this, we literally created an environment that was a simulation of what the environment would be when the warehouse was done, so they could go and train in it, because there was no way to do this in books or online or in a classroom in any way. You needed to experience it, right? And it was a lot of money. And it was actually kind of weird, kind of trying to create like these, setups that had, fake stuff all in them. And to me, this is where VR can really change how we think about development and education, both in the sense of hands-on working environments, but also in dangerous environments or areas where, we've been using augmented virtual reality for flight training for years. This is nothing new on that sense, right? I think we just haven't been able to figure out how to make it cost effective in other places. And I think this is where I'm excited to see Cornerstone take a leadership role here to acquire this company. I'm a little frustrated with the learning space, to be honest, right now, that it feels like there's so much conversation about how we're tying learning to business goals and how we're focused on the management of learning. And we've lost, in some senses, what I think was so exciting about learning so many years ago, which was just rethinking the idea of how you help people learn. So for me, this is, I think, Cornerstone stepping back into the space that we saw 10 years ago, where learning was exciting and it was doing things that was moving the whole market forward. Yes, you want to tie it to business goals. Yes, you want to have the numbers crunched right, but learning in and of itself, I think, is a powerful tool. We need to be investing in it, right?
Absolutely. I just done in a weird sort of just timing and coincidence, I just done a webinar. I don't know if it'll end up being available for on-demand viewing, but it was on learning content and how to be strategic with your learning content with Cornerstone. And that announcement was the day before we had the webinar.
Yeah.
It was really amazing. And they were able to talk about, the application of how learning content can be applied using R, VR, XR, IR in that space. So it's really cool thing to see happen. And speaking of these innovations, Truzaic was named on Fast Company's list of world's most innovative companies. And the reason this is interesting is because here they are. Fast Company's got all these companies that you'd see like your Microsofts and your Valves and all these super high tech and innovative companies. And what Truzaic does is they have a number of different workplace equity platforms, softwares, pay parity, opportunity parity, global pay data reporting, that are basically looking at how your pay is laid out and making sure there aren't any biases. There's no pay disparities based on gender or race or disability or age, all of these things, and it can help you make sure that you're not having these sort of disparities and you're not having this sort of unequalness in your organization. And it's just fun to think about the fact that that's now reached a point where we see this as like a cool and innovative thing rather than just like, oh, it's some new car or something. You know what I mean? That the sort of broader press is going, wow, this is really neat and cool stuff. And I love to see that.
Yeah, and I think if you dive into Truzaic, and I'll be honest, we have not demoed with them or done a briefing with them, but if you look at what they're offering, right, like not only offering sort of, I think, what is the hot topic of pay equity, which is important and we all know need to be talked about, but they also do like ACA compliance and tax credits, which is the other side of that conversation, which is there's value for the small businesses beyond just sort of doing good in the world, right? Of sort of getting this right. And I was just at an offsite for a customer advisory board, actually for a benefits-based company, PlanSource. And we will talk a little bit about that as we wrap up today. But, one of the conversations that we kind of asked all the people like in that room, like, what were some of the things that caused you some of the most headache? And there was no doubt that ACA reporting, right, was a big issue for all of them, right? So, and helping employees see the benefit and the value of some of the non sort of tangential benefits was a big challenge as well. And so I do think that organizations like this are taking what seemed to be a very compliance heavy conversation, adding to it just good social conversations about where the market's heading and making stuff and creating basically more excitement about it, which I love. I love it when we see common sense, pragmatic tied with the cool stuff, because it's meeting a business need, it's achieving outcomes, it's doing things in a way that is not looking for a problem with a cool piece of technology, right?
That's right. And there's been a lot of innovation, and as we mentioned at the top of this, we're going to be mentioning some AI, so buckle up. And here's this stealth. This was a fun headline, right? The full headline was Borderless AI launches from stealth with 27 million for HR assistant. This is a new software coming out, Bernie, which was coming out from the company called Borderless AI out of Toronto. And what this will be is a AI virtual assistant. You can ask questions. There's, I think, 170 languages. And the idea here is that this HR assistant, this AI developed HR assistant, we're going to answer your sort of complex questions regarding legal issues, finance, tax queries. And so obviously this is another area where we're just seeing so many new companies coming in, but this is a really neat story. And I want to also credit Jean Achille for sending this to us. So thank you.
Yeah, this one, Jean, I picked up from Jean, and as we know, Jean does marketing and PR for firms all across the HR space. And I think she does have a good sense of where the market is. I shouldn't say I think. I know she's got a good sense of where the market is heading.
Right.
because she sees a lot both HR and non-HR. And when Jean really does sort of outside of just sort of promoting some of the things that her customers are doing, when she kind of says, hey, this is something that's interesting, I tend to pay attention. And I do think that this idea of an AI assistant, basically powered by all the generative learning that we're seeing in the space right now is important. Whether one company will be better than another, I think everybody's trying to do this. And this is another case of what goes into it and what comes out of it is a big difference. I think the languages is a really hard part. The fact that they've tackled languages up front in this I think is really intriguing, because generally most of them have been trained off of sort of US centric and English speaking sort of data sets in a lot of cases, particularly in HR. And so I do think this is going to be interesting to see where this market heads. We're going to see a lot of these come out. The fact that these organizations have received the money, we look at the spigot for investments has definitely been cut off. This is the kind of organizations that are getting money still. So interesting to watch, right?
Absolutely. And speaking of not being US centric, we're going to talk about just an interesting story that came across in India. We saw a study that had come out that just saw a huge gap in skills needed for AI. This is going to be related to the next story as well. But what they found in this study, which has this great sort of academic name, Accelerating AI Skills, Preparing the Asia Pacific Workforce for the Jobs of the Future, that AWS, Amazon Web Services, put out. And they found that 96% of employers in India find having AI skills, having talent with AI skills is extremely important, but only 79 of them can't find that AI talent, right? So there's a huge need and they're not finding those people. And those are really big numbers. So the fact that nearly 100% in India envision their companies being AI driven by 2028. So here we have this market need for all these AI skills, but especially in India, they're finding that the talent's falling short. So there we go back to what's needed for AI assistance, ease of use, more technology, more learning, right? More of that sort of tech and helping these companies meet those skills gaps. And then I'm laughing because another story that came across was just a sort of meta study that was on how often companies mention AI in any of their public meetings, right? So anytime they're doing earnings calls or announcements, they found that in the Fortune 500, the number of S&P 500 companies citing AI on earnings calls, it's up to 180 of the S&P 500 as compared to 2014 when it was 1. So just kind of a fun, we joke a lot here about how often AI gets brought up. So it's fun to see that people are taking note of, wow, people really talk about AI a lot. So.
Yeah. And I think that this whole thing goes to show, one is, are we looking for the right skills? One, what are those skills? Two is, when we're talking about artificial intelligence, are we really having the kind of conversations we need to have? We talked a little bit about Athena Karp last week and how she was talking about where do we need to infuse the human component to it. I'd really like to see us expand the idea of what are the skill sets that are really needed inside of AI. And so I think both of these stories lend themselves to that conversation, right?
That's really it, because I think for too long when people think, oh, we need programmers, but there's other ways to work with AI, right? Maybe you're just the person who is better able to put it in sort of the right queries, or you're the person who understands what the landscape looks like of AI so that you're able to sort of fit, okay, we need this, then I know where to go look, or I know the types of possibilities that are out there. There's so many different ways we need to think about, as you said, all the different skills around AI.
Well, and speaking of that, I know we're wrapping up for the day, and both you and I are on tight schedules this week, but we wanted to make sure we got the recording done this week. But I just came back from the PlanSource event where they were doing a customer advisory board, just a small group, I think about 20, 25 customers at most. Really, really powerful, though, to hear the CHROs and the heads of total rewards and everything talking about what was important to them and what they needed. We were giving a session on sort of the benefits and the workforce of tomorrow and where all that was heading and how that was being tied to sort of the changes in benefits. But the conversations that came back were that as big as AI is, they want every one of them raised their hand and said, our company is being very careful about what they do, and they've put in place some sort of tool or some sort of statement saying that our employees are not allowed to use it in certain situations, right? Like that was the across the board of all the HR leaders in that room, right? And what they were really interested in right now is like, there's bigger issues right now that we're dealing with. We're still struggling with where are people working with the remote work conversation. We're still struggling with managing to upkeep with compliance and regulations inside of our organizations. And we're definitely still struggling with the fact that we have talent in some areas that's in abundance and talent in other areas that we're really, struggling to keep. And so I do think that, if we're really going to see AI make a difference in our world in HR, it has to start tackling the more practical needs. Plansource did a really good job of showing where they were going to be inputting AI and how it was going to be helping them reduce the amount of time they had in sort of building out communications for campaigns, which is a big part of the benefits world. That's coming down the road. They're still working on those tools, but they were also, I think, really talking about how important it is that you got things right in benefits that you make, because this is when people need you the most, right? And when they expect people to have the right information at their fingertips when you're dealing with benefits. And it was really powerful to see them really having a human conversation on all of this. So I'll continue to be the advocate for this, that I like AI. I think AI is going to change our world and going to make changes, but we've got to figure out where the human component fits in it and how we continue to keep the human side of it. So yeah, it's been a good week. You and I will both be traveling. I think maybe not the next time we record, but the week after we'll both be in different cities. I'll be out on the West Coast at the Oracle and the Workday Innovation session and application session, and you will be at 2 events, right, coming up?
That's right. I'll be in Austin in mid-April, April 15th to the 18th for WorkHumans event. Beautiful Austin. I've attended that before. It's always wonderful. And the week after that, April 22nd to the 25th, I'll be in Miami for Workforce Software's event, Ignite is the name of that one. And that's not too far. I live in St. Petersburg, Florida, so I'll get to take the train, which is a nice treat.
Yeah, some nice opportunities to get out and sort of have some conversations. Also, we are just getting ready to start. We're doing our kickoff tomorrow. So for all of those who've signed up, we have a full quorum now in our brand new 6-month immersive education series called Building an Adaptable HR System Strategy that works concept to business case and outcomes. It's starting with our kickoff tomorrow. The first session is the second week in April, I think, with a lot of cohort material and on the ground work, as well as the plan that you will build out an HR system strategy by the time you get through this 6-month program with 2 sessions a month. And I'm really excited about this because we've got some really great companies who are participating in it. We may do some announcements, so we've got to get everybody's confirmation on that. This is going to be, I think, an opportunity to really delve into some of the stuff that we see in the data and that we're seeing on the ground and helping people actually put it into action in a way that, we haven't done previously, but through this kind of group environment. So I'm excited. So we'll keep you posted on how that cohort program is going for everyone as well. And I apologize, but we got to wrap up, guys. It's been a busy week. I know I'm running off to meetings. You're running off to meetings, Cliff. But just as we wrap today, just a couple of other things. We are getting ready. The full HR systems survey and white paper is still available on the website, but we are getting ready to launch the new survey. So you will start to see announcements around that coming kind of mid-April from some of the distributors and 1st of May from our organization and our public launch. If you are a vendor, association, media outlet, company who does consulting for HR, any of those who are interested in distributing the survey to your audience, this is the only way they're going to be able to get that $1,500 paper is by completing the survey and giving the data. If you want to make sure your audience has access to that, please reach out to us because we're definitely filling out our distributor list quickly. We've got all of last year's distributors signed up again and several new ones this year. So I think we're going to be upwards of 70, 80 plus distributors on our list this year. We cover over 200 HR vendors and we have input from over 5,000 HR practitioners in our annual research. We want you to be part of it. So please definitely participate this year. Also go to our website, sign up for our newsletter to get ongoing updates on our research launches, where we'll be speaking or visiting, and when you can participate in our annual survey, which again is opening May 1st. Be sure to listen to our sister HR Huddle podcast, HR We Have a Problem, hosted by our CEO, Terry Zipper. These HR Huddle episodes, if you really like them and want to support them, please put something in the podcast notes and like and share these. That's the only way that we know that this is working and that we're giving you guys what you need. Oh, and when you do come up and say that you hear us on the podcast, it does make Cliff and I smile a little bit, doesn't it, Cliff?
Yeah.
We like it. To stay up to date with the immediate breaking HR tech news and to get all the behind the scenes content you can follow us at Sapient Insights on LinkedIn, on X, and Instagram. And finally, thanks to Cliff for pulling together all of the content that we've been talking about today. Thanks to Brand Method Media Group, who helps us produce the podcast, run by our amazing founder, Kelly, and our marketing team, Lisa Renko and Summer Orlano, who make sure everybody gets access to this. Thanks to you, our listeners and community. We couldn't do this without you. And finally, that's it for this episode of Spilling the Tea on HR Tech. We hope it's been just the brew you needed to start the engines running this week. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another pot of boiling hot HR Tech updates and insights. Bye, everyone.